There are places in the world that become famous because they are beautiful. And then there are places that become famous because they seem impossible. The Great Wall of China belongs to that second category. You see it once, even in a photograph, and the mind immediately begins to simplify it. A wall across mountains, a stone dragon along the ridges, a single line between civilization and chaos. China on one side, the enemy on the other. One emperor, one command, one impossible act of human will. And that is the first lie the wall tells, because the Great Wall of China was never one wall. It was never one project. It was never built by one emperor. It was never built in one age. And it was never as simple as a barrier between China and the outside world. What we call the Great Wall is really a vast frontier system. Walls, trenches, ramparts, beacon towers, forts, mountain passes, watch posts, military roads, storage stations, garrisons, and border towns. UNESCO describes the complete route as more than 20,000 kilometers, with elements built across different historical periods, forming a complicated defensive system rather than a single continuous wall. But the myth is stronger than the fact. The myth says the wall was built to keep invaders out. The myth says it protected China for centuries. The myth says it can be seen from space. The myth says it was built on the bones of dead workers. And like many powerful myths, each of those stories contains a piece of truth and a great deal of distortion. The real story is darker, stranger, and more human. Because the Great Wall was not born from confidence. It was born from fear. Fear of the northern frontier. Fear of horsemen who could move faster than infantry. Fear of raids that appeared and disappeared before imperial armies could respond. Fear of losing land, grain, people, tribute, and authority. Fear that the emperor's power ended where the grasslands began. To understand the Great Wall, you have to forget the tourist postcard for a moment. Forget the restored stone battlements near Beijing. Forget the clean steps, the souvenir shops, the photographs taken at sunrise. Go back to a time before China was unified, before the first emperor, before the wall had a name, before it became a wonder of the world. There was no single China yet. There were rival states. Armies moved across the plains. Kings betrayed other kings. Borders shifted. Cities rose and fell. The northern frontier was not a clean line on a map. It was a dangerous zone where farmers, soldiers, traders, herders, raiders, and diplomats all lived close to one another, and where survival depended on speed, grain, horses, and information. This was the age of the warring states, and long before the famous Great Wall, these states were already building walls. Not the great stone structure most people imagine today. Earlier walls were often made from rammed earth, layers of soil, gravel, reeds, wood, and local materials compressed into hard defensive barriers. They were not romantic, they were practical. They did not exist to impress future tourists. They existed because rulers were terrified of being invaded, surrounded, or erased. Some walls were built against northern peoples. Others were built against rival Chinese states. This is one of the first myths we have to break. The Great Wall did not begin as one national project. It began in division. The earliest walls were not a symbol of Chinese unity. They were signs of fragmentation. They marked the paranoia of competing kingdoms. Every ruler wanted to hold territory. Every ruler wanted time. Time to see an enemy coming. Time to call troops. Time to protect crops and people. A wall does not need to be perfect to be useful. It only needs to slow the enemy long enough for someone to react. That is one of the great truths behind the wall. It was rarely meant to be an absolute barrier against fast horsemen. A wall could delay movement, force attackers toward guarded passes, expose them to watchtowers, and make surprise raids more difficult. A wall could guide traffic, it could control trade, it could decide where people crossed, where taxes were collected, where soldiers waited, and where imperial authority was physically visible. A wall says, "From here, someone is watching." But in the Warring States period, no one was watching all of China. There was no all China. There were only states, ambitions, and fear. Then came Qin. The state of Qin was hard, disciplined, militarized, and ruthless. It rose from the western edge of the Chinese world and became stronger than its rivals. Its armies conquered one state after another until, in 221 BC, the king of Qin declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He did not simply claim to rule a kingdom, he claimed to rule all under heaven. For the first time, China was unified under imperial rule, and almost immediately the northern frontier became a problem. A unified empire needed unified borders. It needed roads, laws, weights, measures, scripts, armies, taxes, and a frontier that could be defended. Earlier walls from different states were no longer enough. Some were destroyed, some were connected, some were extended. New defensive lines were created in the north. This is where many people imagine the Great Wall beginning. One emperor commands and a wall appears. But even that is too clean. What Qin Shi Huang did was not create the entire Great Wall as we imagine it today. He ordered the linking and strengthening of earlier northern fortifications into a more unified defensive system. UNESCO notes that around 220 BC, under Qin Shi Huang, earlier fortifications were joined into a united defense system against invasions from the north. But the Qin Wall was not the brick and stone monument tourists walk on today. Much of it was built from rammed earth and local materials. It was built in harsh landscapes. It was built by forced labor. Soldiers, peasants, convicts, and conscripted workers were sent north. Many of them did not go willingly. They were pulled away from farms and families, marched into frontier zones, and forced into construction under brutal conditions. Here the wall becomes not only architecture, but suffering, and this is where one of the most famous myths appears. The myth says the Great Wall was built on human bones. Sometimes the story is told literally. Workers died, their bodies were placed inside the wall, and the wall rose over their remains. It is a powerful image, too powerful to disappear. But historically, the literal claim is doubtful as a normal building method. Human bones would not be useful as structural material. Bodies inside rammed earth or masonry would weaken the construction rather than strengthen it. The wall was built from earth, stone, brick, lime mortar, reeds, timber, and whatever local materials were available, not as a regular practice from corpses. So is the myth false? Literally, probably yes. Emotionally, no. Because people did die building the wall. Many died from exhaustion, hunger, exposure, accident, punishment, disease, and the sheer cruelty of forced labor on the frontier. The myth of bones inside the wall survives because it expresses a truth that official records could never fully contain. The wall consumed human lives, and no legend captures that better than the story of Meng Jiangnu. In the most famous version, Meng Jiangnu is a young woman whose husband is taken away shortly after their marriage and forced to work on the wall. She waits. No news comes. Winter approaches. She worries he has no warm clothes, so she travels across mountains and rivers to bring him winter clothing. When she finally reaches the wall, she learns he is already dead. Her grief is so overwhelming that she weeps until a section of the wall collapses, revealing human bones. The story of Lady Meng Jiang is one of China's great folk tales and has existed in many forms over centuries. Later versions often place the tale in the Qin dynasty and connect it directly with corvée labor on the Great Wall. Did it happen literally? Probably not in the way the legend tells it. But legends do not survive only because they are factual. They survive because they reveal how people felt. To an emperor, the wall might have been a defensive system. To a general, it might have been a line of control. To a court historian, it might have been an achievement of imperial organization. But to ordinary people, especially those whose families were torn apart by labor demands, the wall could become something else entirely. A place where husbands vanished. A place where bodies disappeared. A place where grief had nowhere to go except into stone. That is why the legend matters. Meng Jiangnu does not defeat the wall with an army. She defeats it with mourning. Her tears expose what imperial power tries to hide. And from the beginning, that is the double nature of the Great Wall. It is both a monument to power and a monument to fear. It protects the empire. It also reveals the empire's cruelty. The Qin dynasty did not last long. Qin Shi Huang created an empire, but his dynasty collapsed soon after his death. The harshness that built roads, walls, tombs, and bureaucracy also helped destroy the regime. Rebellions broke out. The empire cracked. A new dynasty rose, the Han. Under the Han dynasty, the story of the wall changed again. The Han inherited the northern frontier problem, but they also expanded China's world. Their conflict with the Xiongnu, powerful nomadic confederations of the steppe, shaped military policy, diplomacy, marriage alliances, tribute, trade, and frontier construction. The wall was no longer only a defensive line, it became part of a larger frontier machine. The Han pushed westward into the Hexi Corridor, the long, narrow passage leading toward Central Asia. This mattered because controlling that corridor meant controlling access to routes that later became associated with the Silk Road. Frontier walls, forts, watchtowers, and beacon systems helped protect movement, monitor traffic, and secure military colonies. Here another myth begins to break. The myth says the Great Wall separated China from the outside world. But the wall did not simply shut the world out. In many periods, it regulated contact. Trade still happened. Diplomacy still happened. Marriage alliances happened. Raids happened. Markets happened. Envoys moved. Horses came south. Silk moved west. Ideas traveled in both directions. The frontier was not a locked door. It was a zone of negotiation, violence, exchange, and control. A wall can block, but it can also channel. It decides where people may pass. It decides where the state can watch them. It decides who is legal and who is not. That is why the wall was never only about military defense. It was also about administration. It turned landscape into policy. It transformed open movement into controlled crossing. And this is one of the reasons the Great Wall is more interesting than the myth. A simple wall against invaders would be impressive, but a system that combines defense, trade, surveillance, communication, taxation, and imperial imagination is far more revealing. The Han frontier was not silent. It was alive with signals. Beacon towers could send warnings across long distances using smoke by day and fire by night. One tower saw the signal, then passed it to the next. In theory, information could travel faster than an army. A raid in the frontier could become news in a command center far away. Again, the wall was not just stone or earth, it was information. It was an early warning system. It was the empire trying to give itself eyes. But no system lasts forever. After the Han Dynasty, China entered long periods of division, reunification, collapse, and rebuilding. The wall did not move through history as one continuous, uninterrupted project. It was repaired, neglected, expanded, abandoned, rebuilt, and reimagined, depending on who ruled and what they feared. Some regimes needed walls badly, others relied more on cavalry, diplomacy, alliances, or offensive campaigns. Some had the strength to project power far beyond old defensive lines. Others hid behind walls because they could no longer dominate the steppe. This brings us to another myth. The myth says every Chinese dynasty treated the Great Wall as sacred and essential. That is false. Some dynasties invested heavily in frontier walls. Others did not. Some sections crumbled, others were replaced. Some older lines lost military relevance when the political frontier shifted. The wall was not a timeless obsession. It was a response. When the North felt dangerous, walls mattered. When the empire felt strong, walls could seem less urgent. When the empire expanded beyond the old frontier, walls could become obsolete. When the empire weakened, walls could become desperately important again. So the Great Wall is not just a structure, it is a measurement of anxiety. Look at when walls are built, and you can often see where power feels insecure. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, and then came one of the greatest tests of the wall's meaning: the Mongols. If the Great Wall is imagined as the thing that protected China from northern invaders, then the Mongol conquest is the moment that myth begins to bleed. The Mongols were not a simple raiding force. They were one of the most formidable military powers in world history. They combined mobility, discipline, intelligence networks, psychological warfare, siege techniques, and political strategy. They could devastate settled states, absorb skilled engineers, and exploit divisions among their enemies. Against such a force, walls could help, but they could not guarantee survival. A wall can slow cavalry. It can defend a pass. It can force an army toward a gate. It can give defenders an advantage. But a wall cannot fix bad leadership. It cannot repair a divided court. It cannot stop betrayal. It cannot make starving soldiers loyal. It cannot keep an empire alive if the empire is already breaking inside. This is one of the hardest truths in the story. The Great Wall did not make China invincible. Northern powers crossed, bypassed, negotiated through, or conquered beyond wall systems at different times in history. The Mongols eventually established the Yuan dynasty and ruled China. So was the wall useless? No. That would be another simplistic myth. Military defenses can be useful even if they are not perfect. A fortress that eventually falls may still delay an enemy. A wall that fails in one campaign may succeed in another. A frontier system can reduce raids, protect settlements, and buy time for armies to gather. But the wall was never magic. It did not stop history. It participated in history. The Mongol conquest changed the meaning of the wall because it proved that the northern frontier could not be solved by architecture alone. And after the Mongols came the Ming. This is the dynasty most people unknowingly imagine when they picture the Great Wall. The Ming dynasty was founded after the Mongol Yuan dynasty was overthrown. The Ming rulers inherited not only a country, but a trauma. China had been ruled by a northern conquest dynasty. The memory of that humiliation shaped Ming frontier policy. The north remained dangerous. Mongol groups remained powerful. The Ming could fight them, trade with them, negotiate with them, punish them, and try to manage them. But the problem never disappeared. So the Ming rebuilt, and rebuilt, and rebuilt. This is when the wall became, in many places, the dramatic brick and stone structure familiar today. Britannica notes that the Ming rulers continuously maintained and strengthened the Great Wall to prevent another Mongolian invasion. But even here we must be precise. The Ming did not build every part of the Great Wall from nothing. They repaired older lines, strengthened key sections, built new fortifications, expanded systems, and used more durable materials in important regions. Near Beijing and other strategically significant areas, brick and stone walls, crenellated battlements, watchtowers, and fortified passes became more prominent. This is why the tourist image is misleading. When people visit famous restored sections like Badaling or Mutianyu near Beijing, they often imagine they are seeing the Great Wall in its universal form. But they are mostly seeing the Ming Wall, restored, curated, and preserved in a way that older rammed earth sections in deserts and remote regions are not. So another myth falls. The whole Great Wall does not look like the stone wall near Beijing. Some sections are brick, some are stone, some are rammed earth, some are ruins, some are barely visible. Some have disappeared into fields, sand, villages, roads, and erosion. Some are magnificent, some are broken scars, and some do not look like a wall at all to an untrained eye. The Ming Wall, however, gave the world its most powerful image. A wall running over mountains, watchtowers rising along ridges, stairs climbing into cloud, stone geometry against wild landscape. But beneath that beauty was military logic. The Ming Wall was not merely a wall, it was a defensive network. Watchtowers allowed soldiers to observe movement. Beacon towers transmitted warnings. Forts housed troops. Passes controlled entry. Garrisons held men, weapons, grain, and animals. Roads allowed military movement along the frontier. The wall turned the northern landscape into a system. And yet, the more impressive the Ming Wall became, the more it revealed Ming anxiety. Strong empires do not always need walls. Threatened empires build them obsessively. This is not because walls are stupid, it is because walls are honest. They show where fear lives. The Ming court faced a brutal strategic problem. The steppe cavalry to the north could move quickly and strike unpredictably. The Ming state, based on agriculture, cities, bureaucracy, and tax grain, had different strengths and weaknesses. Holding the northern frontier required money, men, logistics, horses, weapons, discipline, and constant attention. The wall helped, but it also cost. Building and maintaining walls required labor, materials, transport, soldiers, and administration. In mountain terrain, moving stone and brick was exhausting. In remote zones, supplying workers and garrisons was difficult. The wall was not a one-time expense, it was a permanent demand. A wall that is not guarded is just a monument. A tower without soldiers is only a view. A gate without loyalty is already open. And this leads to the most dramatic contradiction in the Ming story. The Ming Wall was powerful, but the Ming dynasty still fell. The final crisis did not come from one simple cause. Dynasties rarely collapse neatly. There were fiscal pressures, factional politics, military strains, natural disasters, peasant uprisings, and external threats. The empire weakened from within, while pressure gathered from without. Then comes one of the most famous places in the entire Great Wall system, Shanhaiguan, the pass where the wall meets the sea. It is a place built for symbolism: mountains, fortifications, coastline, empire, frontier, and destiny compressed into one location. It guarded a crucial route between Manchuria and the North China Plain. If the wall were a locked door, Shanhaiguan was one of its great keys. In 1644, the Ming dynasty was collapsing. Rebel forces, led by Li Zicheng, captured Beijing. The last Ming emperor, the Chongzhen emperor, died by suicide. Ming authority disintegrated at the center. At Shanhaiguan, the Ming general Wu Sangui faced a decision. The Manchus were beyond the wall. Rebels had taken the capital. The old order was falling apart. Wu Sangui opened the pass to the Manchus. The Manchus entered China, defeated Li Zicheng's forces, and established the Qing dynasty. The wall had not been smashed by brute force. The gate had opened. This is why the fall of the Ming is so important to the story. It breaks the childish idea that walls fail only when enemies climb over them. Sometimes walls fail because someone lets the enemy through. Sometimes walls fail because the state behind them has already lost control. Sometimes the strongest gate in the world is useless if the political world around it collapses. The Ming wall had been built to guard against northern power, but the dynasty ended with northern power entering through a pass held by a Ming commander. This is not just military history, it is tragedy. A wall can be high, a watchtower can be alert, a fortress can be armed, but loyalty, legitimacy, and survival cannot be built from brick. After the Manchus established the Qing dynasty, the wall's meaning changed again. This is one of the strangest reversals in the whole story. The Qing rulers came from beyond the old Ming frontier. They were the people the Ming defense system had been meant, in part, to contain. Once they ruled China, the wall no longer separated the empire from the northern world in the same way. The border had moved. The old line had lost its old purpose. Under the Qing, the empire expanded deep into Inner Asia. Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, Manchuria, and other frontier regions became part of a much broader imperial world. The Great Wall was no longer the same urgent defensive boundary between China and the north. A wall that once marked danger now sat inside a larger empire. So what happens when a wall loses its enemy? It becomes memory. It becomes landscape. It becomes ruin. It becomes symbol. In some places, the wall remained useful locally. In others, it declined. Stones were taken. Earth eroded. Towers collapsed. Villages grew around it. Farmers used nearby materials. Wind, rain, sand, neglect, and time did what invading armies could not always do. They made the wall ordinary. This is another important truth. The Great Wall was not always treated as a sacred national treasure. For many people living near it, it was just part of the land. A ruin, a resource, a dangerous old structure, a place for grazing, a source of bricks, a boundary marker, a memory no one fully owned. Only later did the wall become the global symbol we know today. Modern nationalism changed it. Tourism changed it. Photography changed it. Schoolbooks changed it. Foreign fascination changed it. Restoration changed it. The wall was reborn as an image of endurance, a physical proof that Chinese civilization was ancient, powerful, continuous, and grand. This was not completely invented. The wall really is ancient. It really is vast. It really does represent extraordinary labor and military organization across many centuries. But modern symbolism also cleans the story. It makes the wall look more unified than it was. It makes it look more successful than it always was. It makes suffering look noble from a distance. It turns forced labor into heritage. It turns fear into pride. That is what monuments often do. They survive long enough to change sides. The workers who hated the wall disappear. The emperors who ordered it disappear. The soldiers who froze in towers disappear. The generals who failed disappear. The widows who mourned disappear. And the monument remains, ready to be given a new meaning by people who did not pay its original price. Today, millions of visitors walk along restored sections of the Great Wall. They climb its steps, take photographs, and say they have seen one of the wonders of the world. And in a sense, they have, but they have also seen a selected version. The restored wall is real, but it is not the whole truth. The Great Wall also exists in ruined sections far from tourist routes. Some parts are endangered by erosion, weather, development, vandalism, and human damage. Modern reports have shown how vulnerable unrestored sections can be. In 2023, 2 people were arrested after allegedly cutting through a damaged section with an excavator to create a shortcut. That story sounds absurd at first. How could anyone cut through the Great Wall? But it reveals something important. The wall is not one protected museum object behind glass. It crosses real landscapes where real people live. Some sections are famous and guarded. Others are remote and fragile. Some are majestic. Others are crumbling back into earth. The Great Wall is not only a symbol, it is also a physical object, and physical objects decay. This is why the myth of perfection is dangerous. People imagine the wall as complete, eternal, and unbreakable. But much of it is vulnerable. Time is always stronger than stone. And then there is the most famous modern myth of all. The myth says the Great Wall is the only man-made object visible from space. It is repeated so often that many people learn it as a fact before they ever question it. But it is not true in the way people usually mean it. NASA has stated that despite the myth, the wall is not visible from the Moon, and it is difficult or impossible to see from Earth orbit without high-powered lenses. This myth is almost too perfect, because the Great Wall's most famous modern fact is false. A wall built to be seen by enemies from the frontier became, in legend, a wall visible from the heavens. The claim makes emotional sense. The wall feels like it should be visible from space. It feels too large to belong only to Earth. But size alone is not visibility. The wall is long, but it is narrow. Its color often blends with the surrounding land. Roads, cities, airports, and other human structures can be easier to see from orbit than a narrow wall following natural terrain. So the space myth collapses, and when it collapses, it teaches us something. The Great Wall has always been larger in imagination than in simple fact. That does not make it less important. It makes it more interesting. Because the Great Wall is not only a structure people built, it is a structure people keep rebuilding in the mind. Every age creates its own wall. The warring states saw walls as survival. Qin saw the wall as imperial control. Han saw frontier systems as military and trade management. The Ming saw the wall as defense against northern power. The Qing saw it as an older boundary inside a larger empire. Modern China saw it as a national symbol. The world saw it as a wonder. Tourism saw it as a destination. Myth saw it as a dragon, a tomb, a miracle, a line visible from space. But the real wall is harder to hold. It is not one thing, it is many things layered together. It is fear made visible. It is labor turned into landscape. It is military engineering and political theater. It is a graveyard of unknown workers, even if their bones were not literally mixed into the bricks. It is a symbol of strength that often reveals weakness. It is a defense system that sometimes worked and sometimes failed. It is a border that could not stop all movement. It is a monument that became more unified in memory than it ever was in construction. To walk on the Great Wall is not simply to walk on stone. It is to walk on centuries of anxiety. Every tower asks a question. Who were they watching for? Every pass asks another. Who was allowed through? Every ruined section asks another. Who paid for this with their body? And every restored section asks the most uncomfortable question of all. What did we have to forget in order to make this beautiful? Because the Great Wall is beautiful. That part is not a lie. It is beautiful in the mountains, where it rises and falls like something alive. It is beautiful in winter, when snow gathers in the cracks between stones. It is beautiful at sunrise, when watchtowers appear one by one out of the mist. It is beautiful in ruins, when earth walls dissolve back into the desert. But beauty is not innocence. A palace can be beautiful and cruel. A fortress can be beautiful and desperate. A wall can be beautiful and still be born from fear. That is the real story of the Great Wall of China, not a simple story of national greatness, not a simple story of oppression, not a simple story of military success or failure. It is a story of civilization trying to draw a line against uncertainty. And uncertainty always returned. The horsemen returned. The traders returned. The armies returned. The labor demands returned. The myths returned. Even when the wall failed, the idea of the wall survived. That may be the most powerful thing about it. It did not survive because it kept everyone out. It survived because every generation found a reason to keep looking at it. The emperor saw control. The soldier saw duty. The worker saw suffering. The widow saw loss. The invader saw an obstacle. The tourist sees wonder. The nation sees endurance. The historian sees layers. And the myth sees something even larger. A wall so great it could hold back chaos. A wall so costly it must contain bones. A wall so vast it must be visible from space. A wall so famous that even its lies became part of its truth. But the real wall does not need those lies. The real wall is already extraordinary enough. It crossed mountains, deserts, grasslands, and centuries. It connected dynasties that never knew each other. It outlived the emperors who ordered it built. It outlived the enemies it was meant to resist. It outlived the states that maintained it. It outlived the people who cursed it. And now it stands as one of the strangest monuments human beings have ever left behind. Not because it proves that walls can stop history, but because it proves the opposite. History passes through everything. Through gates, through empires, through myths, through stone, through memory. The Great Wall is not great because it was invincible. It is great because it failed, survived, changed meaning, and still remained. And that is why, when you see it stretching across the mountains, the first lie still tells itself. It looks like a line between worlds. But it was never that simple. It was never just China on one side and danger on the other. The danger was outside. The danger was inside. The danger was hunger, rebellion, ambition, collapse, betrayal, forgetting, and time. The wall was built to face the north, but in the end it faces us, and it asks what every great ruin asks. What did people fear so much that they were willing to build this? And what did they lose while building it?